The golden light of late afternoon bathed the vineyards of Tuscany in a glow so rich and surreal that the hills looked almost as if they had been painted by the gods. Villa Bellavista stood perched above it all like a crowned monarch, its ancient stones basking in the amber warmth. Generations of the Laurent family had lived, ruled, and dreamed within its walls, but tonight it was a fortress, and Isabella Laurent was its prisoner. Inside the Grand Master Suite, the air hung heavy with the scent of white roses and lavender, but Isabella barely noticed. She stood before an opulent mirror, its gilded frame stretching taller than her reflection staring back like a stranger. She wore a gown spun from fantasies, layers of ivory silk and intricate lace that shimmered when she moved. Pearls traced the delicate curve of her collarbone. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, pinned with her great-grandmother's heirloom combs. From the outside, she looked like a queen about to claim her throne. Inside, she felt like a lamb led to slaughter. She drew a shaky breath, one hand rising instinctively to touch the diamond necklace that rested just above her heart. It was a piece of history, passed down through the Laurent women for centuries, and now it felt like a noose. Everything about tonight was heavy, the weight of expectation, of duty, of survival. A knock sounded at the door, polite but firm. Elena's voice followed, soft and urgent. "Isabella, it's almost time." Isabella couldn't respond. She was frozen, caught between the life she was expected to lead and the life she secretly longed for. She could see it all, stretched before her like a gilded path. Marriage to Victor Moretti, merging the Laurent legacy with his empire, securing her family's future at the cost of her own. Victor. Just the thought of his name made her stomach clench. He was a man of immense power and even greater ambition, but no tenderness, no warmth. His hands, when they touched her, felt cold. His smiles were sharp, practiced things that never reached his eyes. He spoke of love, but in the same breath negotiated the terms of their union like a contract. Her father, Vincent Laurent, had made it clear. This was the price they all had to pay. Years of reckless business decisions, of bad gambles disguised as bold ventures, had left the Laurent fortune threadbare. Their vineyards, their shipping investments, even this magnificent villa, all leveraged against loans they could never repay. Victor was their salvation, and Isabella was the currency. She thought of her mother, Genevieve, gone 5 years now. Genevieve had been the soul of the Laurent house, a woman of fierce intelligence and boundless heart. She would have fought this marriage with every breath, but she was gone. And Vincent Laurent was a man drowning in desperation, willing to sacrifice his only daughter to save the remnants of his pride. Isabella blinked hard against the sting of tears. She would not cry. Not now. Not in this dress. Not in this room filled with ghosts and memories and the suffocating scent of roses. She turned away from the mirror, the skirts of her gown whispering against the marble floor. She walked to the window and pushed it open, letting the cool evening air slap her cheeks awake. Below, the courtyard was already filling with guests, elegant figures in designer tuxedos and couture gowns, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter rising like smoke into the twilight. They had come to witness a union, a spectacle. None of them knew the truth, that the bride was a prisoner, the ceremony a cage. In the far distance, Isabella could see the rolling hills stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Freedom lay somewhere beyond them, wild and untamed and so desperately out of reach. Or was it? A thought flickered in her mind, dangerous and intoxicating. What if she didn't walk down that aisle? What if instead she slipped through the cracks of this crumbling empire and made her own escape? It was madness. It was folly. It was the only thing that made her heart beat faster than despair. Slowly, methodically, she crossed the room to the massive wardrobe and pulled open a hidden compartment at its base. Inside, tucked beneath layers of velvet and mothballs, was a pair of simple flat shoes, a hooded cloak, and a small leather pouch containing a handful of euros and an old cell phone, her emergency kit prepared in secret over the last month. She had memorized every inch of Villa Bellavista as a child. She knew the servants' passages that twisted behind the main halls, the forgotten wine cellars, the old garden gate that had been abandoned when the new security systems were installed. It was a maze she had once explored in play, but tonight it would be her salvation. The first step was always the hardest. Heart-pounding, she slipped out of her heels and into the flats. She draped the cloak over her shoulders, the heavy fabric, muffling the brilliance of her wedding gown. She tucked the pouch into the folds of her skirt and moved toward the hidden door behind the wardrobe. The house seemed to breathe around her, ancient and indifferent. It had seen the rise and fall of fortunes, the making and breaking of dreams. It would not remember her. As she slipped into the narrow stone corridor, the cool air wrapped around her like a blessing. The passage was dark, the only light a faint shimmer from the wall sconces left burning for centuries by tradition more than need. Isabella moved quickly but carefully, the soft soles of her shoes making almost no sound against the worn stones. In the distance, she heard the first notes of music rise from the courtyard, a string quartet playing something light and expectant. The guests would be taking their seats. The ceremony would begin soon. She had minutes, maybe less. She reached the end of the passage and paused, pressing her ear to the wooden panel that concealed the entrance to the garden. She heard nothing but the rustle of leaves and the murmur of distant voices. Steeling herself, she pushed. The panel gave way with a soft groan, and she slipped into the twilight. The garden was a sea of shadows and moonlight, the hedges towering above her like silent sentinels. She kept low, moving quickly across the gravel paths she knew so well, heading toward the old gate near the eastern wall. Freedom shimmered before her, closer than ever, and then disaster. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the hedges. "Who's there?" A voice barked, sharp, masculine, suspicious. Isabella froze, heart in her throat. Footsteps pounded closer. Another flashlight beam joined the first, and then another. The guards. Her father had hired private security, men loyal to Victor Moretti, and his promises of power. She darted into the nearest hedge maze, her mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had timed everything, planned every move. She should have been clear by now, beyond the walls, lost in the hills where no one would find her until morning. But fate had other ideas. She twisted and turned through the maze, breath burning in her lungs. Behind her, the guards shouted, closing in, and then rounding a blind corner, she slammed into a wall of muscle. Hands caught her shoulders, steadying her before she could fall. She looked up and into the eyes of a man she didn't recognize, not one of Victor's men, not one of her father's polished guards. This man was different. He wore a security uniform, yes, but his posture, the way he moved, the glint in his storm grey eyes, nothing about him spoke of hired help. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other. And then, without thinking, driven by pure survival instinct, Isabella did the only thing she could. She grabbed his collar, rose onto her toes, and kissed him. It was desperate, chaotic, messy. She felt his body tense in shock, felt his fingers twitch on her arms. For a terrifying moment, she thought he would push her away, expose her, call the guards. Instead, he responded, not fully, not hungrily, but enough to sell the illusion to the approaching searchlights. When the guards rounded the corner, they found only two lovers hidden in the shadows. "Clear this way," one shouted, "just a couple sneaking off." The beams of light swung away, and the footsteps retreated. Isabella broke the kiss, gasping, stepping back. The man looked down at her, his eyes unreadable. "You're not a guest," he said, voice low. "No," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "And you're not just a guard," he smiled then, slow and knowing. "No," he agreed, "I'm not." The world tilted, possibilities shifting around them like sand. "Help me," she whispered. He hesitated for only a breath. Then he reached out and took her hand, warm and sure. "Follow me," he said. And Isabella, with her heart pounding and the scent of roses and fear thick in the night air, did, into the unknown, into her own story, into her freedom. The night seemed to fold itself around Isabella and Adrian as they disappeared into the tangled corridors of Villa Bellavista's ancient gardens. The world behind them, the glittering courtyard, the polished guests, the orchestrated lies, faded into a memory of another life. Here, under the restless Tuscan sky, only the raw, frantic pulse of freedom remained. Adrian moved with swift certainty, his grip firm but never rough, as he led her through narrow service paths hidden behind thick hedgerows. His long strides spoke of experience, of a man used to navigating the unknown. Isabella stumbled once, the uneven gravel biting into the soles of her borrowed flats, but she pressed on, clutching his hand as if it were a lifeline. Neither spoke at first. Words would have only slowed them down, and there was no room left for hesitation. Only forward. They reached the farthest edge of the estate, where the manicured gardens gave way to wild thickets. A crumbling stone wall, once proud, now broken and forgotten, loomed ahead. The old gate embedded within it was little more than rusted iron and splintered wood, but it was their way out. Adrian crouched, examining the latch. With a grunt of effort, he forced it open just enough for them to slip through. On the other side stretched a narrow dirt path, overgrown with weeds, winding down into the darkened hills. He turned to her then, his voice low but steady. "Are you ready to leave everything behind?" The question struck deeper than she expected. Isabella looked back once, just once, at the looming silhouette of Villa Bella Vista against the night sky. It stood serene and timeless, indifferent to her plight, to her dreams, to her suffering. She nodded. Yes. Adrian's answering smile was brief but genuine. Without another word, they plunged into the night. The path wound downward through dense woods, the moon a thin sliver barely piercing the canopy. Branches snagged at Isabella's cloak, stones turned beneath her feet. But she followed, her resolve hardening with every step away from the life she had been shackled to. After what felt like hours, the trees thinned, revealing a small clearing, where an old Land Rover lay hidden beneath a tarp and camouflaged netting. Isabella blinked in astonishment. He had planned this. He had prepared. Adrian pulled off the cover and opened the passenger door for her with a quiet urgency. She hesitated only a moment before climbing in. The vehicle rumbled to life with a coughing roar that sounded deafening in the stillness. Adrian pulled onto a barely visible track, maneuvering with careful precision. His face, illuminated occasionally by the dashboard lights, was a study in focus. For a long time they said nothing, the tires crunching over gravel and dirt the only sound. Isabella leaned her head back against the seat, letting the motion lull. Her frayed nerves. Her mind spun with the enormity of what she had done, of what came next. Finally, she turned to him. "Who are you really?" Her voice was hoarse, raw. Adrian flicked a glance at her, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. "Someone who believes you deserve better than a gilded prison." It wasn't an answer, but it was enough for now. They drove through the night, putting mile after mile between themselves and Villa Bella Vista. The landscape shifted from dense forest to open fields bathed in ghostly moonlight, then to winding coastal roads where the scent of the sea hung thick in the air. Hours later, just as the first blush of dawn stained the horizon, they reached a small seaside village tucked against the cliffs of the Amalfi Coast. It was a place out of a dream, all colorful houses clinging precariously to the hills, narrow alleys winding down to a rocky beach. Adrian guided the Land Rover into a secluded garage behind a crumbling stucco building and killed the engine. For a moment, the world held its breath. "You'll be safe here," he said, breaking the silence. "At least for now." Isabella climbed out of the vehicle, her body aching from tension and fatigue. She looked around, taking in the quiet beauty of the place. The battered boats pulled up onto the shore, the faint smell of salt and lemon trees on the breeze. It was a world away from the polished brutality of Villa Bella Vista. Inside the building, the villa was simple but comfortable. Worn wooden beams crossed the ceiling, and faded curtains fluttered in the sea breeze. Adrian flicked on a lamp, casting a pool of warm light across the cozy living room. "You should rest," he said, his voice gentler now. "You've been through a lot." But Isabella wasn't ready for sleep. Not yet. Too much remained unsaid, too many questions burned in her chest. She dropped onto an overstuffed armchair, pulling the cloak tighter around her. "Why were you there? At the villa?" Adrian leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. In the dim light, the planes of his face looked even sharper, shadowed by something more than fatigue. "I was hired under false pretenses," he said after a pause. "Victor Moretti invited me to assess security weaknesses. What he didn't know is that I had my own reasons for being there." Isabella's heart stuttered. "What reasons?" Adrian's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Let's just say, Victor and I have a long history, and none of it good." She studied him in the dim light, piecing together the fragments. His confidence, his calm under pressure, the way he had outmaneuvered trained guards. Adrian Wolf was no ordinary man. He wasn't just an observer, he was a player in a much larger, darker game. "You're not here to save me," she said slowly. "You're here for him." Adrian's gaze locked onto hers, steady and unflinching. "Maybe. But that doesn't mean I'm not also here for you." The simple sincerity of his words shook her more than any grand declaration could have. He pushed off the wall and crossed the room, crouching before her so they were eye level. "You have a choice, Isabella. You can go back, pretend none of this happened, marry Victor, save your family's fortune." His voice softened. "Or you can fight. Take back your life. On your terms." Her throat tightened painfully. The villa slept, as the early light crept along the ridges of the Amalfi cliffs. Somewhere beyond the open windows, the sea breathed against the rocks, a slow ancient pulse that seemed to echo the pounding of Isabella's heart. She stood at the threshold of the modest kitchen, watching Adrian Wolfe prepare coffee with the same calm precision he had displayed while orchestrating their escape. He was different in this light, less the hardened figure she had kissed in desperation and more a man marked by things he did not speak aloud. She wondered what it had cost him to live a life measured in secrets and risks, wondered why a part of her felt safer with him than she had ever felt within the marble halls of Villa Bella Vista. He glanced up and caught her watching. A half smile curved his mouth, fleeting but genuine. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, roughened by the hour. She shook her head, hugging the worn robe he had found for her tighter around her body. "Too much noise in here," she said, tapping her temple lightly. Adrian nodded as if he understood perfectly. He poured the dark brew into 2 chipped mugs and offered one to her. Their fingers brushed, the contact sending a ripple of awareness through her chest. She swallowed hard and looked away, focusing instead on the smell of coffee, rich and grounding. They sipped in silence for a moment, the unspoken weight of everything pressing down on them. Isabella finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "That kiss, back at the villa." Adrian set his mug down carefully, his movements deliberate. "You don't have to explain," he said, but his gaze didn't waver from hers. "I knew why you did it." "I wasn't thinking," she said, cheeks burning despite herself. "It was the only thing I could think of to not get caught. And it worked," he said simply. There was no judgment in his tone, only a quiet understanding that unsettled her more than anger ever could. Still something twisted inside her. "But you kissed me back." He leaned against the counter, arms folded, the casual pose doing little to soften the intensity in his eyes. "I kissed you back because I wanted to," Adrian said. The words hung between them, bold and undeniable. Isabella gripped her mug tighter, feeling the warmth sear her palms. Part of her wanted to retreat, to hide behind the walls she had spent a lifetime building. But something about him, about this man who had risked everything to help her, made her want to be braver than she had ever dared before. "You don't even know me," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of fear and hope colliding. "I know enough," Adrian replied. "I know you're strong enough to run when every part of you was taught to stay. I know you have more courage than the entire gilded empire you were born into. I know you're not willing to trade your soul for comfort." He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet kitchen. "And I know," he added softer now, "that I haven't stopped thinking about that kiss since it happened." Isabella's breath caught. She stared up at him, seeing not just the calculated strategist but the man beneath, the one who carried his own share of scars. For a heartbeat, she stood on the edge of something vast and terrifying and beautiful. A part of her wanted to dive, head first. Another part wanted to run. Adrian seemed to sense her turmoil. He lifted a hand but stopped short of touching her, giving her the choice. Slowly, Isabella set her mug down and closed the distance between them. Their second kiss was nothing, like the first. There was no desperation, no urgency, no fear of being caught. It was slower, deliberate. A conversation spoken in the language of shared survival and cautious trust. His hand cupped her jaw, anchoring her, while her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, grounding herself against the chaos swirling inside. When they finally parted, both were breathing harder, but neither looked away. "I should warn you," Isabella said, voice trembling with something that felt dangerously like laughter. "I'm not very good at quiet, simple lives." Adrian's smile turned wicked. "Good. I'm terrible at them." A laugh, real and unforced, bubbled from her throat. It was such a foreign sound after the months of suffocation that she almost didn't recognize it as her own. But joy, she realized, was just another form of rebellion. And she was very much ready to rebel. The next hours blurred into a fragile kind of peace. They planned, mapped out their next steps, and shared slivers of their pasts over a simple breakfast of bread and olives and more coffee. Adrian revealed more of himself than Isabella had dared. Hoped for, he had built Wolfe Enterprises from the ground up, a technological empire fueled by ambition and a relentless desire to remain untouchable. His reasons for investigating Victor Moretti were personal. Old betrayals, unhealed wounds, debts yet unpaid. Isabella listened, absorbing the contours of the man who had become her unlikely ally. She told him about her mother, about Genevieve's Fierce tenderness and the way she had taught Isabella to find beauty in small wild things. About how her death had left a silence no music could fill, Adrian listened without interruption, offering only the kind of silence that asked no questions, but accepted every answer. As the sun rose higher, they retreated into strategy. They knew Victor would not rest until he found her. Already, Adrian's contacts whispered of bounty hunters being hired, of surveillance footage being scoured, of bribes offered to local police. Staying in one place for too long was dangerous. Adrian showed her the false identities he had prepared. Fake passports, burner phones, cash in various currencies. "You can vanish," he said. "New name, new life. I can get you out of Europe by the end of the week." Isabella stared at the sleek passports, the endless possibilities. She could be anyone, go anywhere, escape it all. And yet she found herself shaking her head. "I don't want to run forever," she said, voice steady. "I want to end it." He studied her carefully. "Ending it won't be easy. Or safe." "I know," she said, "but Victor won't stop. Not unless we make him." Adrian's lips quirked, a flash of admiration in his gaze. "You really aren't the delicate heiress they raised you to be." "No," Isabella said with a faint smile. "I think I never was." Together, they outlined a plan. Victor's public persona was carefully curated. Philanthropist, businessman, patron of the arts. But beneath that veneer lurked corruption. Adrian had already gathered evidence of money laundering, blackmail, and ties to organized crime. What they needed was proof irrefutable enough to bring him down before he could retaliate. The upcoming charity gala in Florence, a centerpiece of Victor's social calendar, offered the perfect opportunity. "He'll be vulnerable," Adrian explained. "He'll be too busy showcasing his empire to notice us slipping through the cracks." "And if he does notice?" Isabella asked. Adrian smiled, sharp and dangerous. "Then he'll realize too late that he underestimated you." The afternoon faded into twilight as they worked side by side, two minds bent on a singular goal. Isabella marveled at the ease between them, the way their thoughts seemed to align without effort. It felt less like forging an alliance and more like finding something she hadn't even known she was missing. As night draped itself over the coast, they stood on the balcony overlooking the sea, the world spread out before them in endless shades of silver and shadow. Adrian handed her a small black device, a custom encrypted comm he had designed himself. "Stay in contact," he said, "no matter what." She tucked it into the folds of her new dress, a simple navy sundress, a far cry from the opulence of her wedding gown, and met his gaze. "We'll end this," she said, not as a wish but a promise. Adrian reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch lingering. "Together," he said. The sea whispered below them, timeless and patient. Isabella tilted her face toward the stars and smiled. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being led down a path someone else had carved. She was walking her own, and she wasn't walking it alone. "I don't know how to fight," she whispered. Adrian's smile was gentle, almost sad. "You already did, the moment you chose to run." Silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things that didn't need to be said. Outside, the sea whispered against the shore, endless and patient. Isabella reached up slowly and slipped the diamond necklace from her neck. She stared at it for a long moment, this symbol of her family's pride, their mistakes, their desperate clinging to a crumbling legacy. Then she set it down on the table between them. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice steady. Adrian's smile widened, and for the first time, real warmth lit his eyes. "Good." Together they began to plan, not just for survival but for justice, and for something Isabella had almost forgotten. She was allowed to dream of a future she chose for herself. The night was thick with salt and jasmine as Isabella sat curled into the corner of the worn sofa, her knees drawn to her chest, staring at the faint glow of the small device Adrian had given her. The villa's modest lamps cast long shadows across the terracotta floors, dancing each time a breeze rustled through the open windows. Somewhere beyond the walls, the sea whispered secrets to the moon, but Isabella could only hear the pounding of her own heart. Adrian sat across from her, a stack of encrypted files open on the coffee table between them. His face was illuminated by the screen's cold light, his features carved in sharp relief against the night. He was silent, focused, but Isabella could feel the tension radiating from him, a taut wire stretched between resolve and something much harder to name. Hours ago she had agreed to fight, to stop running, to face Victor Moretti and everything he represented. But now, as the reality of their decision took shape around them, fear gnawed at the edges of her courage. It wasn't the fear of getting caught or even of failure. It was the fear of facing the truth about herself, about what she was capable of. Adrian finally spoke, his voice low but sure. "We'll need more than evidence. We'll need witnesses. A leak big enough to make it impossible for Victor to sweep it under the rug." Isabella nodded slowly. "I know people," she said, surprising herself. "Friends of my mother's, journalists, activists. They trusted her once. Maybe they'll trust me now." He lifted his eyes to hers, something close to admiration flickering there. "Good. We'll need them." They worked late into the night, weaving threads of information into a noose that would tighten around Victor's empire. Isabella tapped into the contacts her mother had left behind, sending cautious messages through secured channels. Adrian used his network of investigators, pulling in files that made Isabella's blood run cold. Photos of secret meetings, ledger books coded in languages she barely recognized, lists of names that whispered of debts paid in blood and silence. The hours dragged toward dawn. Exhaustion pulled at Isabella, but adrenaline kept her upright. She had never imagined herself capable of navigating this world of shadows and betrayals, but necessity had a way of stripping away illusions. She wasn't a pawn. She wasn't a sacrifice. Not anymore. When she finally allowed herself to drift into sleep, curled up on the worn cushions with the soft hush of the sea in her ears, it was not the nightmares she had feared that visited her, but dreams of her mother's voice, urging her onward. The morning broke with a muted grayness that matched the gravity of the day ahead. Adrian stood at the kitchen counter, brewing coffee with a focus that seemed almost meditative. Isabella watched him for a moment, memorizing the slope of his shoulders, the set of his jaw. It struck her then how much she had come to trust him, how strange and terrifying and beautiful that trust felt. He turned, catching her gaze. "Eat something," he said, nodding toward the simple spread on the table. "Bread, fruit, cheese." She managed a smile and joined him, grateful for the momentary normalcy. As they ate, Adrian outlined the next steps. "We'll need to get into the gala." "Quietly," he said. "Blend in. Once the presentation begins, we'll trigger the leak. The documents, the evidence, we'll broadcast it across every major network. No way for Victor to contain it." "And if he recognizes us before then?" Isabella asked. Adrian's smile was grim. "Then we improvise." They spent the morning rehearsing every detail, the points of entry and exit, the timing, the hand signals. Adrian was meticulous, drilling contingency plans into her until they became second nature. Isabella absorbed it all, letting herself be shaped into something sharper, harder, more resilient. Fear still hummed beneath her skin, but it no longer ruled her. By the time the sun dipped low against the cliffs, they were ready. Adrian handed her a simple black dress, elegant but unremarkable. He wore a tailored dark suit, his only concession to disguise the absence of the sharp arrogance Victor's crowd expected. They looked, Isabella thought, like any other wealthy couple drawn to the glitter of power and prestige. But beneath the fabric and smiles, they were loaded guns, aimed straight at the heart of everything Victor Moretti had built. They drove north along the coast, the Land Rover blending into the steady trickle of luxury cars heading toward Florence. Isabella kept her gaze trained on the road ahead, her hands clenched in her lap to hide their trembling. Adrian reached over and laid his hand over hers, warm and steady, a silent reminder she was not alone. Florence rose before them in a blaze of gold and crimson, the Duomo's dome catching the last light of day like a beacon. The gala was held at the Palazzo della Signoria, a fortress of history and power that loomed over the city's ancient heart, a place built for spectacle and betrayal. They passed through security without incident, their forged invitations flawless, their covers airtight. Inside, the palace thrummed with life. Champagne glasses clinked, laughter floated through the vaulted halls, and the world's wealthiest predators circled each other with predatory grace. Victor was easy to spot. He stood at the center of the room like a spider at the heart of a web, surrounded by sycophants and admirers. He looked every inch the philanthropist, the visionary, the man of the people. Isabella felt a flash of nausea. She forced it down. Adrian squeezed her hand once before releasing it. They drifted through the crowd, gathering information, planting devices that would link into the broadcast system. Every second stretched taut with risk. When the announcement came, it was almost anticlimactic. A soft chime, a ripple of movement toward the grand hall where Victor was to unveil his latest humanitarian initiative. Isabella took her place near the back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Adrian was somewhere nearby, invisible but present. She could feel his steadiness like a current anchoring her. Victor took the stage, his smile polished to perfection. Cameras flashed. The audience leaned forward, eager for the next piece of fiction he would sell them. He spoke of hope, of charity, of building a better world. He spoke of partnerships and innovation, his voice rich with conviction. And then, just as the crowd erupted into polite applause, the first image flashed across the massive screen behind him. Silence fell like a guillotine. It was a photograph. Victor, shaking hands with known criminal figures, the exchange of envelopes unmistakable. It was followed by spreadsheets, offshore accounts, footage of factories disguising their true illegal purposes. The evidence rolled on. Merciless, undeniable. Victor froze, his practiced composure fracturing. He turned, barking orders to his staff, but it was too late. The leaks were spreading across social media, news outlets, private networks. The room exploded into chaos, shouts, gasps, the metallic clatter of abandoned champagne glasses hitting marble floors. Security swarmed, but Adrian was faster. He pulled Isabella through the panicked crowd, navigating the confusion with surgical precision. They burst into the night air, the coolness a slap against their flushed faces. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, international investigators. Adrian had quietly tipped off days ago. Victor Moretti's empire was crumbling, stone by stone, lie by lie. They didn't stop running until they reached a side street, hidden in the maze of Florence's ancient alleys. They leaned against the cold stone wall, catching their breath, hearts pounding in sync. Adrian turned to her, a wild, triumphant grin breaking across his face. "You did it," he said, voice rough with disbelief and pride. "No," Isabella said, her own smile breaking free. "We did." For the first time, she understood the power of her own choices, the weight and wonder of shaping her own destiny. She wasn't the girl in the mirror anymore. She was something more, something unstoppable, and the world had better be ready. As they stood in the shadowed alleyway, Isabella could still hear the echoes of shouting behind them. Florence, so beautiful and timeless, had turned into a swirling maelstrom of flashing lights, urgent sirens, and the broken glass of illusions shattering one after another. Adrian checked his watch, his jaw tight. "We have about 15 minutes, before the authorities seal off every main road," he said. "We need to move." Isabella nodded, still breathless, still feeling the adrenaline vibrating through her veins. The night pressed close around them, thick with the mingled scents of old stone, smoke, and blooming night jasmine. They darted through narrow side streets, slipping unseen past the chaos spilling outward from the palazzo. Their destination was an old monastery tucked against the northern hills, long abandoned and repurposed by Adrian's network as a temporary safe house. It was not far, but each step felt precarious, as if the ground itself could betray them at any moment. As they climbed the winding paths out of the city, Isabella found herself glancing over her shoulder again and again, half expecting Victor himself to burst from the crowd and drag her back. Rationally, she knew it was over, that the proof they had unleashed would ripple across the globe, that Victor would never recover from what the world now knew. Yet fear was not rational. It gnawed at her like a starving wolf. Adrian seemed to sense it. As they reached a deserted stretch of road lined with ancient olive trees, he slowed, letting her catch her breath. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. The words hit harder than she expected. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the man who had helped her escape, not just the strategist who had dismantled an empire in one night, but someone who had chosen her over and over when it would have been easier to walk away. "No," she whispered back. When they finally reached the monastery, the heavy oak doors creaked open under Adrian's hand. Inside, the air was cool and musty, thick with the memories of prayers once whispered into the darkness. Rows of worn pews lined the nave, and stained glass windows cast fractured rainbows onto the stone floor. It was strangely peaceful here, removed from the world's noise and judgment. Adrian led her to a small chamber tucked behind the altar, ecoiges, simple space with a cot, a table, a few supplies. Isabella sat heavily on the edge of the cot, her legs trembling now that the urgency had drained from them. Adrian crouched in front of her, his hands steady as he checked her for injuries. Only when he was satisfied that she was whole did he sit back on his heels, studying her. "You were extraordinary tonight," he said. Isabella shook her head, a laugh escaping her, brittle and exhausted. I was terrified. Good, Adrian said. Only fools aren't afraid. Courage isn't about not feeling fear, Isabella. It's about doing what needs to be done despite it. She smiled then, a small real thing, and let herself believe, for the first time in a long time, that maybe she was brave after all. They stayed in the monastery until the early hours, monitoring the news through Adrian's secured tablet. The fallout was swift and brutal. Financial regulators launched investigations. Interpol issued warrants. Former allies turned on Victor with lightning speed, desperate to distance themselves from the wreckage. Moretti Enterprises' stock plummeted. Major publications splashed the story across their front pages, damning him with irrefutable evidence. Analysts predicted he would face decades in prison if he even survived the political carnage that was sure to follow. And through it all, Isabella remained strangely calm. She thought she would feel elated, triumphant. Instead, there was a deep, abiding sense of closure. Victor had stolen years from her family, had tried to steal her future, and now he was nothing more than a headline. By dawn, the authorities confirmed Victor's arrest. He had tried to flee by private helicopter, but had been intercepted at a discreet airfield just outside Florence. Adrian showed her the footage, Victor, pale and handcuffed, being led away by stern-faced agents. Watching it, Isabella felt no pity. Only a profound sense of rightness, as if some cosmic balance had been restored. She turned to Adrian. "It's done." "Almost," he said. "Now you decide what comes next." It was a simple statement, but the enormity of it made her breath catch. For the first time in her life, her future wasn't a script written by someone else. It wasn't tied to a marriage contract or a corporate merger or the desperate machinations of a crumbling dynasty. It was hers. "What do you want, Isabella?" Adrian asked gently. She thought about it, really thought. Not about what was expected or what would be easiest, but what her soul ached for. "I want to build something real," she said finally. "Something that helps, that heals instead of destroys." Adrian's smile was slow, proud. "Then that's exactly what you'll do." They sat together as the new day unfolded around them, the light growing stronger, more certain, chasing the shadows from the corners of the old monastery. Isabella leaned against him, feeling his warmth, his steadiness, and allowed herself to hope. Not for the life she had lost, but for the life she would create. A life chosen freely, a life fiercely, gloriously her own. The monastery walls held the coolness of centuries, but the air between Isabella and Adrian was charged with something alive, something breathing with new possibility. As the sun climbed higher over the rolling hills of Tuscany, the old stone corridors that had once echoed with monks' footsteps now bore witness to the forging of a new alliance, not one of necessity or survival, but of purpose. Isabella stood before one of the stained glass windows, the colors painting her skin in fractured light. She felt strangely detached from her body, as if part of her was hovering just above herself, watching the transformation unfold. She was no longer the girl who had been trapped in a tower of expectations. She was something different now, something sharper, forged in fire and tempered by her own hand. Adrian watched her from across the room, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. He didn't speak, didn't intrude. He seemed to understand that this was a sacred moment, one that could not be rushed. Finally, Isabella turned to him, her voice steady. "What happens to the pieces Victor left behind?" Adrian unfolded his arms, his expression serious. "His empire will collapse. Some of it will be seized by the authorities. Some of it will be scavenged by opportunists. What's left might still have value." She crossed the room to stand before him, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the weariness he carried like an invisible cloak. "And what if we claimed it?" she asked. "Not to exploit it, to rebuild it, to make it mean something better." Adrian's brows lifted slightly, a spark of interest flaring in his gaze. "You're talking about taking control of what's left." "Not control," Isabella said, her pulse quickening. "Redemption. We could turn what he built into something good. Use the resources he hoarded to help the people he hurt." Adrian studied her for a long moment, weighing her words not just for their strategy but for the heart behind them. Finally, he nodded. "If that's what you want," he said, "then I'll help you do it." The plan took shape with the precision of a military campaign. Adrian's contacts provided intelligence on the shell companies Victor had hidden around the world. Isabella's former connections, once carefully curated by her family for social advantage, became unexpected allies in securing the legal pathways needed to transfer control. But reclaiming Victor's fractured empire was only half the battle. To truly change its legacy, they would need to create something new, something that could not be corrupted by greed or fear. They decided to establish a foundation, Aurora Initiative, dedicated to restoring communities devastated by corporate exploitation. A global network offering microloans to small businesses, scholarships for underserved students, funding for clean energy projects in forgotten corners of the world. The name Aurora had been Isabella's choice, a new dawn after a long dark night. In Nazi, the weeks that followed, they worked relentlessly. Days blurred into nights, and nights into early mornings spent hunched over laptops and conference calls. There was no glamour in it, no instant gratification. Just slow, steady progress, a different kind of building than either of them had ever known. Through it all, their partnership deepened. There were moments, small and precious, when the gravity of their mission lifted just enough for something tender to surface. A shared joke over terrible instant coffee. A hand brushed against another when reaching for a pen. A glance that lingered too long during a rare lull in the storm. One evening, after a grueling day of meetings, Isabella found herself sitting on the steps of the monastery's courtyard, her bare feet dangling above the cool stones. Adrian joined her without a word, lowering himself beside her with a soft grunt. For a long time, they just sat there, listening to the cicadas sing the night awake. "You amaze me," Adrian said finally, his voice roughened by exhaustion and something deeper. Isabella turned her head, surprised. "I'm just doing what has to be done." "No," he said. "You're doing what most people wouldn't even dare to dream. You walked away from everything safe, everything certain. You chose the harder road." She smiled a little sadly. "Maybe because I finally realized that the safe road was the one leading to a life I didn't want." He reached over, threading his fingers through hers with quiet certainty. "You chose freedom," he said. "And that's never the easy choice." Their fingers stayed tangled together as the stars kindled one by one above them, ancient witnesses to a future being born. In the following months, the Aurora Initiative took root. Isabella traveled tirelessly, meeting with community leaders, activists, dreamers who had been waiting for someone to believe in them. Adrian was her shadow and her anchor, navigating the labyrinth of international politics and financial red tape with the kind of ruthless efficiency that had once built empires of a very different kind. Together they learned the rhythms of true partnership, not dominance or dependence, but the constant give and take of equals. There were setbacks, of course, sabotage attempts by those loyal to Victor's memory, lawsuits from embittered former associates, even whispers in the media trying to taint Isabella's name with the sins of her family. But she weathered them all, because every time doubt crept into her heart, every time the weight of it all threatened to break her, she remembered the choice she had made: to be free, to build, to love, not blindly but bravely. One night, as they prepared for the official launch gala of the Aurora Initiative in New York City, Isabella stood before the mirror in a simple but elegant gown of deep blue. She hardly recognized herself, not because of the dress or the subtle elegance of the jewelry Adrian had insisted she wear, but because of the woman staring back at her, a woman who had fought for her life and won. Adrian appeared behind her, his reflection a steady presence at her shoulder. "You're ready," he said simply. She turned, heart pounding, not with fear, this time, but with anticipation. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said. He shook his head. "You could have. Maybe not the same way, maybe not as fast, but you had it in you from the start." She smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Not tears of sorrow this time, but of fierce, overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the world narrowing to the space between them. Then slowly, Adrian reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with a tenderness that stole her breath. "I love you," he said. It was not a declaration born of urgency or desperation. It was steady, sure, irrevocable. And it was everything. Isabella placed her hand over his heart, feeling the strong, steady beat beneath her palm. "I love you too," she said. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. It was theirs. As they left for the gala that night, stepping into the cool embrace of the New York evening, Isabella knew that no matter what storms, still waited on the horizon. She had already won the greatest battle, the battle for herself, for her future, for a love that had been born not in comfort but in courage, and she would never give it up, not for anything, not for anyone. The gala was a symphony of glitter and power, the kind of event that masked its ruthless ambitions beneath champagne smiles and polished words. The glass walls of the Javits Center in New York reflected 1,000 points of light, a mirror to the city's restless, relentless heart. Tonight was meant to mark the official launch of the Aurora Initiative. But for Isabella Laurent and Adrian Wolfe, it was more than that. It was the culmination of everything they had fought for. Every risk, every scar, every broken piece had led them to this night. Isabella stood just beyond the main entrance, her breath misting in the crisp night air. The navy blue of her gown shimmered subtly under the glow of the floodlights. Adrian was at her side, immaculate in a tailored black suit, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. His presence grounded her, a silent reminder that whatever storms awaited, they would face them together. Inside, the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Investors, philanthropists, journalists, the titans of industry and influence gathered under one roof, drawn by the irresistible magnet of a cause that promised redemption not just for Isabella, but for a world weary of broken promises. She could feel the weight of their gazes as she entered, the curiosity, the admiration, and from a few, the lingering skepticism. After all, she was a Laurent, a name that once symbolized wealth, scandal, and collapse. To some, her emergence as a beacon of change was little more than a clever rebranding. But she knew the truth. She had lived it, bled for it. The hall had been transformed into something breathtaking. Images of the communities they were already helping flickered across massive screens. Young girls in Kenya reading books in newly built schools. Entrepreneurs in Brazil launching sustainable businesses. Villages in India lit by solar grids where darkness had reigned for centuries. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't enough. But it was real, and it was only the beginning. Adrian squeezed her hand once discreetly before stepping aside to allow her the space she needed. This was her night. As somewise, she approached the stage, the murmurs quieted. The spotlight found her, painting her in gold and silver. She stood there for a heartbeat, allowing herself to feel the enormity of it. Not fear, not doubt, but gratitude. She began to speak, her voice clear, carrying easily across the sea of glittering faces. "Good evening," she said. "When I first imagined this foundation, it was not from a place of triumph, it was from a place of loss, of betrayal, of anger." A ripple moved through the crowd. Isabella let it. "For a long time I believed that power was about control, about holding on to what you have no matter who gets hurt in the process. It's what I was taught. It's what I lived." She paused, searching for the right words, the ones that would not simply impress but reveal. "But then I lost everything. And in that hollow space I found something better. Purpose, connection, hope." The images on the screen shifted, to children laughing, to families rebuilding, to women signing contracts with pride in their eyes. "Power isn't about what you can take," Isabella said, her voice gaining strength. "It's about what you can give." The applause that erupted was not the polite clatter of wealthy hands meeting social expectation. It was real, fierce, undeniable. As she stepped down from the stage, Adrian was there, waiting. His eyes met hers, and for a moment the world narrowed to the two of them. No cameras, no expectations, just a man and a woman who had clawed their way through darkness and found each other on the other side. But the night was far from over. As Ajalais, the guests mingled. Isabella moved through the crowd, shaking hands, answering questions, weaving the delicate web of alliances that would sustain the initiative's early days. She saw familiar faces, some from the world she had left behind, others who had watched her fall and now marveled at her resurrection. And then, near the edge of the room, she saw him, Victor Moretti, or what was left of him. He was thinner now. His once proud shoulders bowed, his eyes shadowed with bitterness and defeat. Released on bail pending trial, he was a ghost in a world that had moved on without him. Their gazes locked across the distance. He made no move to approach her. He didn't need to. His very presence was a challenge, a reminder that while he had been defeated, he had not been erased. Adrian appeared at her side, his body tense, protective. "You don't have to engage," he said quietly. Isabella took a slow breath, feeling the strength she had forged in herself rise to meet the moment. "I'm not afraid of him," she said. "Not anymore." She crossed the floor with unhurried steps, each one a reclamation of the power that had once been stolen from her. Victor watched her approach, his mouth twisting into a sneer. "You think you've won," he said, voice low and venomous. She tilted her head, regarding him with a calm he could not touch. "No," she said. "I know I have." He laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "You're no different from me, Isabella. You used people. You played the game." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "The difference," she said, "is that I built something worth saving." For a heartbeat, Victor's mask slipped and she saw it, the emptiness, where his power had once been. A black hole of rage and regret. Without another word, she turned away, leaving him standing there like a relic of a dying age. Adrian was waiting for her by the balcony, the city spread out behind him in a blaze of light. "How do you feel?" he asked. She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Free," she said simply. They stood together, watching the city breathe below them. Somewhere, music floated up from the gala, a soft reminder that life, messy and magnificent, continued. Adrian reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You know," he said, his voice teasing, "most people would take a vacation after. Something like this," she laughed, the sound ringing bright against the night. "Maybe after the next 10 projects," she said. "I have plans." His smile was a slow, dangerous thing. "I love your plans." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid beat of his heart against her cheek. "I love you," she said. And it was so easy, so right. They stayed there long. After the gala ended, long after the last guest had drifted into the waiting night, long after the world's noise had faded into the background, because here, in this quiet space carved out by defiance and hope, Isabella Laurent had found something far more powerful than revenge. She had found her true beginning, and it was only just the start. As the gala wound down, Isabella found herself standing at the edge of the grand ballroom once more, absorbing everything. The lights had dimmed to a warmer glow, the crowds thinning to only the most persistent socialites and business leaders, lingering over late glasses of champagne. She had expected a different feeling once the launch was done, a crashing sense, of finality perhaps, or a surge of triumph. Instead, what filled her was a steadier, more powerful current, a feeling of becoming. As if tonight wasn't an ending or even a beginning, but simply her next natural step forward. She drifted toward the reception area where her closest supporters had gathered. Activists, entrepreneurs, a few daring investors who had seen not just the potential for profit, but for real change. They welcomed her warmly, speaking in rapid bursts about next steps, new proposals, areas they hoped to partner. Isabella listened intently, weaving through their energy, absorbing every idea. She realized with a quiet satisfaction that the Aurora initiative was no longer a fragile dream clutched tight to her chest. It was alive, growing, beyond her even. Adrian, she noticed, stood nearby, not interfering, just watching her with that particular gaze she had come to recognize, an expression of unwavering respect and something even deeper, something that made her skin hum with belonging. Later, when the last champagne flute was emptied and the last set of heels clicked away into the New York night, Isabella and Adrian found themselves once again on the wide balcony, overlooking the endless sprawl of the city that had been both battleground and sanctuary. "You changed them tonight," Adrian said after a long moment, his voice rough with pride. Isabella smiled, not in arrogance but in acknowledgement. "Maybe," she allowed, "but it's only a start." He turned toward her fully then, leaning one elbow casually against the stone railing. "You're not going to slow down, are you?" "No," she said simply. "There's too much to fix, too much to build." Adrian's eyes gleamed, catching the faint light from the street lamps below. "Good," he said, "because the world doesn't just need dreamers. It needs builders, fighters." He pushed away from the railing and moved toward her, the night wrapping around them like a secret. "And you," he murmured, his hand lifting to brush a strand of hair from her cheek, "you are all of those things." Isabella caught his hand in hers, holding it against her heart. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have," he corrected softly. "But I'm grateful you didn't have to." The kiss that followed wasn't hurried, wasn't born from urgency or fear. It was something earned, built slowly, steadily, on foundations stronger than either of them had known to exist before. When they parted, Adrian pressed his forehead against hers and simply breathed with her, matching his rhythm to hers as if anchoring them both to this precise, perfect moment. They stayed on the balcony until the first traces of dawn stretched their sleepy fingers across the horizon, painting the city in golds and pinks. It was Isabella who spoke first, her voice thick with exhaustion but fierce with conviction. "There's still so much to do." "And we'll do it," Adrian said without hesitation. All of it. They returned to the penthouse that had served as their base in New York, an open, sun-drenched space filled with scattered plans, laptops, and half-empty mugs of coffee from long nights strategizing. It felt lived in, real, a far cry from the museum-like opulence of Villa Bella Vista. As Isabella changed into more comfortable clothes, jeans, a soft sweater, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She hardly recognized the woman staring. Back. Gone was the girl burdened by family expectations and false futures. In her place stood a leader, a warrior, a creator. She made her way to the sprawling couch where Adrian was already poring over reports and proposals. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment there was no need for words. He handed her a tablet. "We got our first funding approvals," he said, a slow grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. 3 projects are greenlit to start next month. Isabella scanned the reports quickly. Solar initiatives in West Africa, microloans for women-led businesses in Southeast Asia, healthcare outreach in underserved rural American communities. Real work, real change. She set the tablet aside and threw her arms around Adrian, laughing in pure, unfiltered joy. It was only the beginning. Later that morning, they sat together at the large windows watching the city awaken. Cars streamed like rivers. Below, and the hum of life was a steady drumbeat against the glass. "Tell me something," Isabella said suddenly, turning to him. "Anything. If you hadn't met me that night, if you hadn't been there in that garden, where would you be now?" Adrian leaned back, considering. "Still fighting," he said, "but probably alone." "Same," she admitted. He tilted his head, studying her. "Are you sorry for meeting you?" She smiled, slow and sure. "Never." He reached for her hand again, their fingers tangling easily. "Neither am I." And somehow, it felt as though the universe, with all its chaos and cruelty, had finally tilted in their favor. They weren't naive. They knew there would be battles ahead. Political pressure, corrupt corporations fighting to maintain their hold, even personal betrayals they could not yet foresee. But they also knew this. Together, they were unstoppable. Isabella would never, again, be the girl trapped in the tower. She was the architect of her own destiny now. And with Adrian at her side, not as her savior, not as her captor, but as her partner, she would build something that would endure beyond both of them. Underneath the brightening sky, they sat together, sketching out plans for a future that, for the first time, felt entirely gloriously theirs. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real. A year later, the gardens bloomed with a wild, defiant beauty that Isabella, Laurent had never dared to imagine. In the heart of Tuscany, Villa Bella Vista had undergone a quiet transformation. No longer a mausoleum of failed ambitions and broken promises, it had been reborn, a living sanctuary for new beginnings. The black roses her mother had once planted now thrived along the stone paths, their dark petals lush against the soft greens of the vineyard hills. What had once symbolized mourning and loss now stood as a testament to resilience, to rebirth. Isabella stood before the tall mirrors in the villa's sun-drenched dressing room, fastening the final clasp on a gown unlike any she had worn before. It was simple in its elegance, tailored to move with her rather than confine her. The bodice was a whisper of silk against her skin, embroidered with delicate black roses twining up from her waist. It was a design she and Adrian had chosen together, every stitch a symbol of how far they had come. She caught her own reflection, paused and smiled, not with the brittle polish she once wore like armor, but with something softer, deeper. A woman who had fought for her freedom, her voice, her future. Behind her, the door creaked open, and James Laurent, her father, stepped inside. His once proud figure had softened over the past year, humbled by time, regret, and a second chance he had not dared hope for. "You look like your mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Strong, beautiful, unstoppable. Isabella turned, her heart tightening at the sight of him. They had walked a long, painful road toward reconciliation. One paved with difficult conversations, with apologies too long delayed, with forgiveness that had not come easily but had been fought for with the same tenacity she had brought to every other battle. "She's here today," Isabella said, touching her heart. "I can feel it." James nodded, blinking rapidly. "She would be so proud of you." "So would I," the words hung between them, unspoken but understood. A soft knock signaled it was time. Together, father and daughter descended the grand staircase of Villa Bella Vista, not as symbols of a crumbling dynasty, but as survivors carrying forward a legacy redefined by choice rather than obligation. The gardens outside had been transformed into a wonderland of light and life. Tiny lanterns hung from the olive trees, casting a warm glow over the gathered guests, friends, family, colleagues from the Aurora Initiative, all of them witnesses to the culmination of a journey that had begun not with a proposal, but with a kiss of desperation in a moonlit garden. At the center of it all stood Adrian Wolfe, waiting. He wore a tailored black suit that spoke of effortless confidence, but his signature had always been in the details. The subtle silver cufflinks shaped like laurel leaves, the black rose pinned to his lapel, the way his storm-grey eyes softened the moment he saw her. As Isabella walked down the aisle, time seemed to fold inward. She saw not just this day, but every step that had led her here. The night spent planning in secret, the daring escape, the impossible kiss, the battles fought side by side. Every tear, every triumph, every whispered vow to herself to never settle for less than everything she deserved. Adrian's smile grew as she drew closer, and Isabella felt the last of her doubts scatter like ash on the wind. The officiant spoke, but Isabella heard only fragments. What anchored her was Adrian's hands as they found hers, steady and sure. What moved her was the way he looked at her, not as a savior or a possession, but as an equal, a partner, a beloved. When it came time for their vows, they had chosen to speak their own words. Adrian's voice was rough with emotion as he began. "Isabella," he said, "you stormed into my life when I least expected it, and saved me from a loneliness I didn't even realize I was living. You are my compass, my strength, my home. I promise to stand with you, to build with you, to fight with you and for you every day that we're given." Tears blurred her vision, but Isabella refused to blink them away. She wanted to feel every second of this. She took a deep breath and spoke from the marrow of her being. "Adrian," she said, her voice steady despite the tears slipping down her cheeks, "you taught me that love is not chains or bargains, but freedom. You believed in me when I had nothing left to believe in. I promise to walk beside you, not ahead, not behind. Together, always. No matter what storms come, I will choose you." The rings they exchanged were simple bands of platinum inscribed on the inside with a single Latin phrase Adrian had found: "Ad astra per aspera," to the stars through difficulties. The guests rose as they kissed, sealing their promises with a certainty that shook the very foundations of the old villa and wrote something new into its bones. The celebration that followed was filled with a kind of joy that Isabella had once believed she might never touch again. Laughter echoed through the gardens, music lifted into the warm twilight, and glasses clinked in endless toasts to beginnings, to bravery, to love. Underneath the broad canopy of stars, Isabella and Adrian shared their first dance as husband and wife. There was no choreographed performance, no rehearsed perfection. They simply held each other and moved slowly, savoring the preciousness of now. Around them the world spun on, imperfect, chaotic, beautiful. They had built something enduring, not in spite of the chaos, but because of it. Later, after the guests had departed and only the soft murmur of the night remained, Isabella and Adrian wandered through the gardens alone. She walked barefoot along the winding paths, her shoes abandoned somewhere hours ago, her gown whispering against the stones. They paused by the black rose garden, the very heart of Villa Bella Vista. Isabella knelt, brushing her fingers against the velvety petals, remembering. "My mother planted these," she said. "She said they were symbols of mystery, of the beauty in darkness." Adrian knelt beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. "You've given them a new meaning," he said softly. "Resilience, hope." She leaned into him, closing her eyes, breathing in the scent of earth and sea and life renewed. "We have so much left to do," she murmured. "And we'll do it," he promised. "Together." She turned her face toward him, finding his eyes in the darkness. "Always?" she asked, her voice a prayer. "Always," he said, sealing it with a kiss that tasted of salt and tears and the infinite. And so they began, not at the beginning of a fairy tale, but in the middle of a much better story. A story written with blood and courage, with scars worn proudly, with love fierce enough to rebuild broken worlds. a story that would stretch out across the years ahead, marked not by perfection but by the relentless, beautiful choice to rise, again and again, into love, into hope, into life. And under the endless Tuscan sky, surrounded by the black roses that once wept and now sang, Isabella Laurent Wolfe chose her forever, with open eyes, with an open heart, and with a spirit no longer caged but soaring. In the journey of Isabella Laurent, we witness a profound truth. Freedom is not given, it is seized. Love is not about possession, but about partnership. And true power is not built on control, but on the courage to rebuild from ruin, to rise from betrayal, to choose hope over fear. Through every stolen moment, every act of defiance, every step toward a future she chose for herself, Isabella reminds us that even when life seems determined to script our fate, we hold the pen. We are not defined by the circumstances we inherit, but by the battles we choose to fight and the lives we dare to create from the ashes. This story is not merely about escaping a forced destiny. It is about forging a new one, built not on compromise or surrender, but on resilience, love, and fearless authenticity. It teaches us that the deepest scars can become the foundation for the greatest strength, and that sometimes the greatest victories are not the loudest, but the ones won quietly in the heart. If Isabella's story has moved you, if it has reminded you that you are more powerful than your past, stronger than your setbacks, and worthy of the life you dream of, then we invite you to continue this journey with us. Subscribe to our channel to stay inspired by more stories of hope, courage, and transformation. Your support gives us the motivation to keep bringing you the narratives that remind us all, no matter how dark the night, a new dawn always awaits. Together, let's keep building stories that change lives.